welcome to quarterly content training for RLA grades K through 2, quarter 3. Today we'll be previewing the quarter 3 curriculum for grades K through 2. We will be unpacking a unit and customizing a lesson, and then we will discuss resources to help with lesson customization. As always, we want to start with our learning objective. Our learning objective for this session states, I am learning about the Amplify units for quarter 3. Success criteria 1 states, I can explain what Amplify units and topics will be covered in quarter 3. Success criteria 2 says I can unpack a unit and an end of unit assessment. And then we have success criteria 3, which states I can locate resources that can support me with my instruction. Let's dive into success criteria 1. Please take a moment to read that to yourself. And let's get started. We are now going to preview the knowledge units that will be covered in quarter 3 in kindergarten. They start with Domain 7, Kings and Queens. In this domain, students listen to fiction and nonfiction read aloud texts about kings and queens and royal families in order to understand the responsibilities, lifestyle, and customs associated with royalty throughout history. Many of the fictional rhymes, poems, and stories in this domain are classic, well-loved tales, including King Midas and the Golden Touch, The Princess and the Pea, and Cinderella. Students will use graphic organizers to sequence story events and complete compare-contrast activities. Then kindergarten students will move to Domain 8, Seasons and Weather, as the Earth turns. In this introduction to weather and the seasons, students will learn that weather follows sequential seasonal patterns and varies in different regions of Earth throughout the year. Students will connect their understanding of changes in weather to the calendar and begin to recognize patterns and characteristics of weather and how these elements affect their daily lives. Writing activities will include journaling and preparing an oral presentation. Finally, kindergarten students will look at Domain 9, Colonial Towns and Townspeople, Once Upon America. This domain will deepen students' knowledge of early history of the United States by exploring what early life was like for people in colonial times, particularly as it compares to life today. This foundational unit provides crucial background knowledge for the subsequent study of specific historical events which moved the nation toward independence. Student writing will focus on sequencing and retelling information. Now let's take a moment to look at some connections across the knowledge domains for kindergarten in quarter 3. You can see that in each of these 3 units, students will be sequencing, whether it's story events, seasons, or in their writing. Next, we can see that graphic organizers will be used to help students organize their information both in Knowledge 7 and in Knowledge 9. And finally, students will be comparing and contrasting both in the Kings and Queens domain unit and in the Colonial Townspeople and when they compare colonial times to life today. Now let's dig into the kindergarten skills units that will be covered in quarter 3. In Skill 6, students automatize the letter-sound correspondences and blending procedures they've learned thus far. They are introduced to consonant clusters, letter names, rhyming words, and to reading text independently. Then in Skill 7, students are introduced to digraphs. Students develop automaticity in blending and segmenting these sounds through phonemic awareness activities, chaining exercises, practice activities, and partner and independent reading. Finally, in Skills 8, students are introduced to double letter spellings for consonant sounds, as well as 4 high-frequency tricky words: funny, all, was, and from. Results from this unit's student performance task assessment informs teachers on which students are ready for the next unit and those who need targeted support with previously taught skills. Now let's talk about what first grade will be covering in quarter 3. First, they start with Domain 6, Knowledge Unit on the History of the Earth. In this introduction to the basics of geology and paleontology, students learn about the geographical features and characteristics of the layers of the Earth, the crust, the mantle, and the core. Students will learn how occurrences such as volcanoes and geysers provide information about the layers of the Earth, and how rocks, minerals, and fossils document the history of living things on our planet. Next, they will move into Domain 7, Animals and Habitats, the World We Share. This domain will introduce first graders to the wonders of the natural world, focusing on the interconnectedness of all living things with their physical environment and with one another. Students will learn about habitats and how to identify specific types and their related characteristics. They will learn to recognize different plants and animals as being indigenous to specific habitats, and will begin to develop an understanding of how plants and animals develop unique characteristics or features that enable them to adapt to the climate and conditions of their environment. Finally, Domain 8, Fairy Tales. First grade students will be introduced to fairy tales that have been favorites for generations, including Sleeping Beauty, Rumpelstiltskin, The Frog Prince, Hansel and Gretel, and Jack and the Beanstalk. Additionally, students will learn about the distinguishing elements of fairy tales, which make them a unique type of fiction. They will consider problems and solutions, make interpretations, and compare and contrast different tales. Students will also recognize that fairy tales share the elements of character, plot, and setting that are found in other types of fiction. Now let's look at some connections across the domains in quarter 3 for first grade. You can see that students will be talking about living things both in Knowledge 6 and in Knowledge 7, and how those things are connected to one another. In each of the 3 units, students will have to set a purpose for listening to the read-alouds. They also will be identifying important information in the informational text in Knowledge 6 and Knowledge 7. Now let's move on to what first graders will be doing in their skills units in quarter 3. In quarter 3, first graders will be working in Skills Unit 4 and Skills Unit 5. Skills 4 introduces the most common or least ambiguous spellings for R-controlled vowel sounds. Students learn the concept of a syllable and practice with 2-syllable words. Students are introduced to past tense verb forms ending in ed as they continue to work with nouns and verbs and phrases. Students are introduced to adjectives as they practice descriptive writing. Next, in Unit 5, Skills, students begin learning spelling alternatives that make up the advanced code. Now that they've learned all of the basic code, they move into the advanced code. They practice making sounds plural and changing spelling when adding suffixes. In grammar, students identify sentence types, statements, questions, and exclamations, and practice creating longer sentences. They plan, draft, and edit a letter in which they express their opinions to the main character in the student reader. And that wraps up what first grade will be doing in quarter 3. Now let's take a brief look at what second grade students will be doing in quarter 3. They will have 3 knowledge domains, starting with Domain 7, Insects all around. Students will learn the characteristics of insects, the life cycles of insects, how insects can be categorized as solitary or social, and how insects are viewed as both helpful and harmful. For example, students will learn how insects are important to the process of pollination and in the production of honey, some cosmetics, and even medicines. This domain will lay the foundation for further study of the life cycles, habitats, and classifications of insects and other animals. Then they will move into Domain 8, the U.S. Civil War. This domain lays the foundation for more in-depth study of a critical period in American history in later grades. Students will learn about the controversy between the North and the South and become familiar with the achievements of key historical figures during this time, including Harriet Tubman, Clara Barton, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and Robert E. Lee. Students will incorporate key vocabulary as they write Civil War journal entries throughout the domain. Finally, second graders will work through Knowledge 9, the human body, building blocks and nutrition. In this domain, students will explore a number of topics related to the human body, beginning with the importance of cells as the building blocks of all life on Earth. Students will learn about organs and body systems, with a focus on the digestive and excretory systems. Students will also learn about pioneering work with the microscope, which led to the discovery of tiny one-celled bacteria. The remainder of this domain focuses on the importance of good nutrition and how to make good choices in order to eat a well-balanced diet. Now let's look at some connections across the domains in second grade knowledge for quarter 3. You can see that students will be recording information and writing in journals in all 3 of these units. They will have to work on citing evidence from text, which is great practice for our text-based responses, getting them ready for 3rd grade in all 3 units. They will be looking at important historical figures, both in Knowledge 8 with the Civil War and in about scientists in Knowledge 9. Now let's take a moment to glance at what second grade students will be doing in Skills Units 4 and 5 during quarter 3. In Skills Unit 4, students are introduced to more spelling alternatives for vowel sounds and 3 tricky spellings. Students will practice persuasive writing as part of a friendly letter. In grammar, students review singular and regular plural nouns as well as common and proper nouns. They're introduced to the formation of irregular plural nouns as well as action verbs and to be verbs. In Skills Unit 5, students are introduced to spelling alternatives for vowel sounds and the schwa sound. Students practice chunking phonemes as a means of reading multisyllabic words. They review grammar skills, learn about adjectives, and practice identifying the subject and predicate in a complete sentence. Additionally, students continue to work on narrative writing by rewriting an ending to a story from their student reader. So take a moment to reflect. Which unit are you most looking forward to teaching in quarter 3 and why? All right, it is now, we have wrapped up Success Criteria 1, and it's time to move into Success Criteria 2. I can unpack a unit and an end of unit assessment. To review some work that we've done in the past, we've talked about annotating the unit introduction. And what you're seeing on the slides here is just one example of what your unit introduction annotations may look like. Today, we will look at the unit assessment in more depth. One of the important components we should look at while we unpack a unit is the assessment in All in Learning. Here is a portion of an assessment from 1st grade, in which students will listen to a statement read aloud by the teacher and then choose the thumbs up or thumbs down button according to the answer. Another resource to consult while unpacking is the assessment blueprint. This document details the TEKS that are on the assessment, whether it's a readiness or supporting standard, and the number of times it appears on the assessment. Finally, at the bottom, we can see the item types represented on the assessment for each of the listed TEKS. All of the RLA blueprints can be accessed in one location. The next round of assessments is available on December 13th. Grades 3 through 5 have added weekly formative assessments. Just a note that this does not include grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. However, if you need any kind of additional formative assessments, don't forget that every skills unit in 1st and 2nd grade includes a weekly spelling test. Additionally, you can use exit tickets or other checks for understanding or other formative assessments that are provided each day, both in knowledge and in skills. As a reminder, we should take the assessment in All in Learning independently before a unit begins and be ready to discuss it in a planning PLC. Then, with our PLC, as we dive into the unit, we can make note of the TEKS that are taught often on a T-chart. You can see that I have done that for a 2nd grade Unit 7 on the left-hand side of this chart. Then I want to compare the TEKS that are frequently taught to the assessed TEKS. To do this, I looked at the blueprints and the actual assessment in All in Learning. We add the assessed TEKS to the right side of the chart and discuss what stands out. For example, if a TEKS is assessed and amplified, then it will be taught in that particular unit, or it may have been taught in a unit prior. However, if the assessed TEKS is only taught once or twice, then teachers really need to drive home those lessons when they teach them. Notice that 2.F on the chart is an assessed TEKS, but it is not on the frequently taught TEKS list. Therefore, I need to be aware of that when I plan for the lesson in which 2.7F is taught. A helpful resource for identifying the recurring TEKS is the TEKS correlation guide. The TEKS correlation guides are found at the end of each unit's teacher guide and shows every TEKS that is taught in a unit, plus the pages on which it occurs. Let's take a few moments to talk about pausing points. Pausing points are provided for both knowledge and skills units. Pausing points occur between lessons and knowledge units, but they happen at the end of skills units. When we unpack the unit and annotate the unit introduction, we will see how many days are provided for pausing points during the particular unit. We may note of that in our exemplar annotations here. Then when we consult the Focused Instructional Planning Calendar, or IPC, we also notice how the pausing point days are indicated during the week. In order to determine what activities can be done during the pausing point days, we should look at the teacher guide for the unit. You can also click on the hyperlink for pausing point days on your focused IPC documents. You can see that for grade 2 knowledge 7, there are 6 pages of activities for pausing point days. The teacher has the discretion to choose from which activities their class would most benefit. The expectation is that pause point days are for Amplify lessons. When thinking about how these days are utilized, we want to make sure we know what they are for and what they aren't for. As you can see here, these pause points should be used for reviewing prior concepts that have been taught or concepts that have been spiraled throughout the unit. It can also be a time for providing opportunity for students to be creative in showcasing their learning. What pause point days should not be are days for test prep, note-taking, additional resources outside of what is provided to Amplify, or a sole focus on Tier 2 materials. Let's take a moment to discuss a few more important details about assessments. Although assessments are given through All in Learning, the directions for administering assessments are provided in the teacher guide for that unit. It is essential to review these instructions thoroughly, well in advance of the day of the assessment. Sometimes assessments will be given on multiple days. In these cases, it will be noted both in the teacher guide and in the IPCs. It is important to note that not all assessments need to be given whole group. Additionally, it is not necessary to use the strictest testing protocols like we do on days in which we take other assessments such as MAP or STAR. Take a moment to reflect. To you, what is the most important aspect of unpacking the unit? And that brings us to success criteria 3. I can identify resources that will help me customize my lessons. The RLA team has been working to make some upgrades to our quarter 3 curriculum documents. Here is a sneak peek of some of those upgrades. First, you will notice the addition and call out of even more engagement strategies designed to involve students more actively in the lessons. One addition that has been frequently requested is now available. Amplify visual aids will be provided as a supplemental resource to help with visual representations during lessons. Again, these are visual aids and they will not replace the actual Amplify lessons. We are receiving these Amplify visual aids on a rolling basis from Amplify. If we have received them, we have linked them in the IPCs. So if you see something that is not linked in an IPC, it's because we unfortunately have not received it yet from Amplify. As soon as we do receive the visual aids, we will upload them to the instructional planning calendars. One final upgrade is our PLC packages. Some of you may have already completed the PLC package that addresses extended constructed response. These PLC packages provide clarification and support for the expectations of ECR and how these essays are to be scored. Be on the lookout for additional PLC packages that will support you with writing instruction. The next PLC package that comes out in the new year will include a separate K-2 PLC package on writing. Many of you have commented on how helpful the Amplify internalization videos have been to you. So don't forget that we have videos to help guide you through unpacking each unit. These videos are available in one place on a Padlet. The QR code on this screen will take you to that Padlet. Take a moment to either take a photo of this slide to use the QR code to go to the Padlet, and then bookmark the Padlet if you haven't done so already. I will pause momentarily to give you a few seconds to do so. We're happy to share a Reading Language Arts newsletter with all of you. If you missed the most recent newsletter, you can access it through QR code on the slide. Each newsletter provides an up-to-date information and resources for all RLA teachers in the district. I will pause to give you a moment to snap a photo of this slide or to use the QR code to access the newsletter. And finally, in our time together today, we want to remind you that we do have office hours every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon from 3:30 to 5 p.m. These are informal times for teachers or administrators to pop in and receive support either from an RLA coordinator or from a district Amplify coach. Again, these are informal, come and go on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Here is our team's contact information. If you need any help with anything, you are welcome to reach out to us by phone or email with any questions or concerns. We also have our RLA website, bit.ly, which is at the bottom right, and our handle on X, formerly known as Twitter. We encourage you to reach out to us with great photos showcasing what's happening in your classroom or with any questions that you have. Thank you for joining us today for the preview of Q3 curriculum and Q3 quarterly content training, RLA grades K through 2. Have a wonderful day.